Obese Schoolteacher was fired and abandoned in Mountains Mountain. Man said, "You teach mine." "Miss Turner, you're dismissed." The words hit harder than any slap. The children froze mid-sentence, their chalk still pressed against the blackboard, as the head of the school board, Mrs. Constance Whitmore, stood in the doorway with a satisfied smirk. Abigail Turner, 25, clutched the lesson plan in her trembling hands. "Ma'am, I don't understand." "Oh, you understand perfectly," Mrs. Whitmore sneered. "This town won't tolerate a teacher who looks like you. It sets a poor example." Laughter rippled from the back of the room, parents who'd come to observe. Abby's cheeks burned crimson. She'd spent years teaching those children to read and dream, to believe kindness mattered more than appearances. And now the very woman who preached morality was publicly humiliating her. "You'll pack your things," Whitmore continued, her diamond brooch flashing in the sunlight. "You're no longer welcome at this school or in this town, if you know what's good for you." That night, Abby walked the dirt road out of Maplewood, her suitcase heavy, her heart heavier. When the hired driver suddenly stopped halfway through the mountain pass and tossed her bag into the mud, she barely had time to scream before the wagon disappeared into darkness. The cold crept in fast. Wolves howled in the distance. Abby pressed forward, tears freezing on her cheeks, whispering prayers that no one heard. By the time the morning sun broke through the fog, she was half delirious, her boots torn, her voice gone. She stumbled toward the faint sound of laughter, children's laughter, by a mountain stream. 3 little faces stared at her with wonder, and then, from the shadows, a deep voice said, "You lost, teacher?" Abby turned and met the man who would change her life forever. Abigail Turner had always believed that teaching was her calling. In a world where women were often told to stay silent, she had chosen chalk and books as her weapons of hope. But hope can be a cruel thing when wielded against the wrong people. In Maplewood, appearances mattered more than integrity. The school was small, 1 room, 12 desks, and a blackboard that barely held together, but to Abby, it was sacred ground. Every morning she lit the fire, swept the floors, and waited for the children to arrive with their bare feet and bright eyes. She had built that place with patience and love. But Mrs. Constance Whitmore, the wealthy matron who ran the town school board, saw Abby differently. "A woman of your size," she'd say in her cold, clipped voice, "should not be instructing impressionable children. They'll learn sloth instead of discipline." Abby had endured the whispers, the mockery, the snide remarks. But when she began teaching her students lessons of equality, reading passages about kindness, courage, and fairness, Mrs. Whitmore saw rebellion. "You're filling their heads with dangerous nonsense," she spat. "This town doesn't need dreamers. It needs order." The meeting that sealed Abby's fate lasted only minutes. Surrounded by men who nodded at everything Mrs. Whitmore said, Abby stood alone. The decision was unanimous. She was fired. She left quietly, refusing to cry until she reached the edge of town. There, under the dying light, she hired a driver to take her to the next settlement. She carried 1 suitcase, a few books, and the conviction that somehow her purpose still mattered. But fate had sharper plans. Halfway through the pass, the driver reined in his horse and turned. "End of the road, miss?" he said flatly. "What? This isn't." He tossed her suitcase into the mud. "Paid to leave you here. You'll figure the rest out." Before she could protest, he was gone. The silence that followed was monstrous. The wind howled through the pines, scattering the last warmth of civilization. Abby clutched her shawl, staring down the endless trail, her breath white in the cold. Hours passed. The food she carried was little, her strength fading. When night fell, she sank beside a frozen log, whispering to herself, "You've survived worse. You'll find a way." Morning came like mercy. The laughter of children led her down a narrow trail toward a sparkling creek. 3 small figures chased each other through the mist, a boy of 10, a younger one of 8, and a little girl with golden braids. Their faces were smudged with dirt, but their joy was real. They stopped when they saw her, wide-eyed and curious. "Are you a fairy?" the girl asked. Abby managed a weak smile. "No, darling, just a lost teacher." Before she could say more, a shadow fell across her. A tall man stepped from the trees, his beard dark, his coat worn but sturdy. His eyes, sharp as flint, scanned her from head to toe. "Who are you?" he asked, voice low and even. "And why are you on my land?" She swallowed hard. "My name is Abigail Turner. I was a teacher, but now I'm—" Her voice cracked. "I'm nothing, I suppose." The man frowned. "You look half frozen." He glanced at the children, who were watching eagerly. "Go on inside, kids." Then to her he said simply, "You'll come too. We'll talk by the fire." That man's name was Caleb Thornton, and though neither of them knew it yet, this meeting born of loss, pride, and mercy would change both their lives forever. The cabin came into view just as the last of Abby's strength gave way. A sturdy log home nestled between pines, its chimney spilling a thin ribbon of smoke into the crisp mountain air. The sight felt like a dream. Caleb pushed the door open and motioned for her to enter. "Sit by the fire," he said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "You look about ready to collapse." The warmth hit her like sunlight after a storm. She sank into a wooden chair near the hearth, her fingers trembling as she held them out to the flame. Cal moved silently around the room, pouring water into a kettle and hanging it above the fire. The children, Samuel, Benjamin, and little Emma, watched her with open curiosity from the staircase. Abby managed a polite smile. "You have a lovely home." Cal gave a small grunt. "It's sturdy. That's what matters. Been just us 4 since their ma passed." His voice softened slightly at that last word, but only for a moment. Abby looked down. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I had nowhere else to go." He studied her for a long time before speaking. "You said you were a teacher." "Yes, or at least I was before I was fired for being improper." He raised a brow. "Improper?" "For believing children should be taught kindness as much as arithmetic," she said bitterly, "and for not fitting their idea of what a teacher should look like." The corner of Cal's mouth twitched something between amusement and anger. People talk too much about looks and too little about worth. When the kettle whistled, he poured her a cup of hot tea and slid it across the table. "Drink this, then tell me how's your health. You hurt?" Abby shook her head. "Just tired and hungry." He nodded. "You'll eat with us tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure things out." That night, the sound of the wind outside was fierce, but the cabin was warm and alive with quiet conversation. Abby listened to the children's laughter, to the clinking of spoons, to Cal's deep, steady voice guiding them in prayer before the meal. It felt almost holy. Later, After the dishes were done and the children had gone to bed, Cal joined her by the fire. He handed her a small wool blanket. "You'll take the spare room," he said. "It ain't much, but it's dry and warm." "Thank you," Abby whispered. "You've already done more for me than anyone else has." Cal rested his hands on the back of the chair, his gaze fixed on the fire. "You said you were a teacher," he said slowly. "My kids, well, they haven't been in school since their ma died. The town's too far, and truth be told, I don't trust folks down there much. They've got more pride than heart." Abby looked up at him, unsure where he was going. He turned to her then, his gray eyes steady. "If you're willin', you can teach mine. Readin', numbers, whatever you know. I'll handle the rest, food, roof, firewood." She blinked. "You mean stay here? With you?" He nodded once. "Seems fair. You need shelter. They need a teacher. The mountain's hard, but honest. Better than freezing to death or crawling back to people who don't deserve you." Abby hesitated, her heart pounding. Could she really live here, with this quiet, solemn man and his wild children? But when she looked into the next room and saw Emma curled up in a quilt, her small lips murmuring a bedtime rhyme Abby herself had taught in school, it felt like destiny. She met Cal's gaze. "I'll stay, and I'll teach them everything I know." Cal gave a single nod. "Good. Then we have a deal." He turned to stoke the fire one last time, his shadow tall against the cabin walls. "Rest easy, Miss Turner. You're safe now." For the first time in weeks, Abby believed him. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind outside and the faint, steady heartbeat of a new beginning. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the frosted windows, painting gold across the wooden floor. Abby woke to the scent of coffee and the faint sound of laughter. For a moment, she forgot where she was until she saw the quilted ceiling beams above her and heard the mountain wind singing through the pines. When she stepped into the kitchen, Cal was already at the stove, flipping flapjacks with the precision of a soldier. Samuel and Benjamin were arguing about who got the last piece of bacon, while little Emma sat on a stool, humming to herself as she tried to braid her doll's yarn hair. Abby smiled. "Good morning." Cal glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "You sleep well?" "Yes, thank you. For everything." He handed her a tin mug of coffee. "You'll need that if you're going to wrangle these three all day." The children giggled, and Abby took her first sip, the bitter warmth grounding her. "Then I suppose I should start with introductions." She crouched beside the children, her voice soft but confident. "I'm Miss Turner. Your father asked me to be your teacher. Does that sound all right?" Benjamin wrinkled his nose. "We don't like school." Abby grinned. "Neither do I, unless there's pie afterward." That made Emma laugh, and even Samuel's serious face softened. They began their first lesson on the big wooden table by the fire. Abby used a piece of coal to draw letters on scrap wood. "Each sound we make has a shape," she said, showing them how to carve their names. "And when you put the shapes together, you can build worlds." Hours passed unnoticed. The cabin filled with the music of learning, Emma's giggles, Benjamin's shouts of discovery, Samuel's quiet determination. Cal worked outside splitting wood, pausing now and then to watch through the window. Each time he saw Abby leaning over the table, her voice patient and full of warmth, something inside his chest softened a part of him that had been frozen since his wife died. At supper, the children clamored to show what they'd learned. "Pa, look!" Benjamin said proudly, holding up his wooden board. On it, in shaky letters, was written, "Family." Cal's throat tightened. "You did that yourself?" Benjamin nodded. "Miss Turner says words can be magic." Cal met Abby's gaze across the table. Seemed she was right. Days turned into weeks, and routine took root like spring grass after frost. In the mornings, Abby taught reading and numbers. In the afternoons, she joined the children outside helping Cal stack wood, feed chickens, or gather berries along the stream. At night, they'd sit by the fire as she read from her few tattered books, her voice carrying softly through the cabin while Cal carved figures from pine wood. One evening, while the children slept, Abby noticed a small wooden bird sitting on her chair. Its wings were delicate, carved with care. "Did you make this?" she asked. Cal shrugged. "Seemed like you could use something pretty." Abby turned it in her hands, her voice barely a whisper. "No one's ever made me anything before." He looked away, embarrassed. "Well, they should have." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, warm, alive. As the first snow came, Abby discovered something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. She laughed freely, sang while she cooked, and taught with passion again. The children adored her. Even the animals, Cal's hound, Jasper, followed her everywhere. But the person most changed was Cal. The quiet, brooding mountain man began to speak more, smile more. Once, when she slipped on the icy porch and nearly fell, his arm shot out to catch her. For a moment, their faces were inches apart, their breath mingling in the cold air. "Careful," he murmured. "Can't have the teacher breaking her neck." Abby laughed, her cheeks flushed. "You're very protective, Mr. Thornton." "Can't help it," he said, his voice low. "You've brought life back into this place." That night, Abby lay awake, staring at the flicker of firelight dancing across the ceiling. For the first time, she dared to imagine a future not built on fear or rejection, but on love, quietly taking root in a mountain cabin. And outside, as snow blanketed the world in silence, Cal sat by the dying fire, carving something new. Not a bird this time, but a small heart. Winter deepened, turning the world into a quiet ocean of white. For Abby, the cabin had become both sanctuary and purpose. Every morning began with laughter and ink-stained fingers, and every night ended by the fire, reading to the children while Cal listened in silence, his gaze softening each time she smiled. But peace, Abby knew, never lasted forever. It began with the letter. Cal found it wedged in the doorframe one icy morning, a fine envelope sealed with red wax. He frowned, brushing the frost from its surface before handing it to her. "It's got your name on it." Abby's heart sank the moment she saw the handwriting. It was Constance Whitmore's. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. "Miss Turner, your recent whereabouts have come to my attention. It seems you've chosen to involve yourself with an unsavory mountain man, living in sin and corrupting innocent children outside the reach of civilized education. This letter is a warning. Return to Maplewood at once to answer for your misconduct, or the law will come for you. Mrs. Constance Whitmore, head of the school board. Abby's breath caught in her throat. She folded the letter quickly, her fingers trembling. Cal noticed. "What's that about?" "It's nothing," she said too quickly. "Just an old ghost." But Cal wasn't a man easily fooled. Later that night, after the children were asleep, he pressed her gently. "You've been looking over your shoulder since morning. Tell me the truth." So she did. She told him everything from her firing to the humiliation to the driver who'd left her to die in the mountains. And finally, she showed him the letter. Cal's jaw clenched as he read, She had you abandoned? His voice was low, dangerous. That's attempted murder, plain and simple. Abby reached for his hand. Please, Cal, don't go to town. Don't give her reason to twist this into something worse. He exhaled slowly, the firelight catching the steel in his eyes. You think I'm scared of a woman who hides behind letters? She's a bully, same as every other coward who ever swung their power at the wrong person. She has influence, Abby whispered, and I don't want the children caught in it. For a while, neither spoke. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. Then Cal said quietly, Let her come. I'll be ready. Days passed, heavy with tension. Abby tried to keep the lessons going, pretending all was well, but fear crept into her voice. The children noticed. Even little Emma asked, Are the bad people coming for you, Miss Turner? Abby smiled faintly. Not if we stand together. The confrontation came sooner than expected. One bitter morning, the sound of wagon wheels shattered the stillness. When Cal stepped outside, 3 horses stood before the cabin Mrs. Whitmore at the front, her fur-lined coat bright against the snow, flanked by the town sheriff and 2 men with rifles. Mr. Thornton, she called sweetly, I believe you have something that belongs to Maplewood. Abby appeared in the doorway behind him, pale but unshaken. I don't belong to you, Mrs. Whitmore. The older woman's eyes narrowed. You will when I'm finished. Harboring a fugitive is a crime, and so is corrupting minors. Cal's hand tightened around his rifle. Those minors are my children, and that woman saved their minds and mine. Mrs. Whitmore sneered. You think anyone will believe the word of a backwoods recluse and a disgraced teacher over mine? Abby stepped forward then, voice steady, though her heart pounded. They will when they see this. She pulled a folded sheet from her coat pocket, the letters she'd found from the hired driver, proving Mrs. Whitmore's bribery and cruelty. The sheriff took them, scanning the signatures. His expression changed. Ma'am, this looks like serious evidence. Whitmore blanched. Those are lies, fabrications. But the sheriff had already turned to her guards. Mrs. Whitmore, I'll need you to come with me to answer some questions. For once, the woman who had destroyed so many lives stood speechless. When the wagons rolled away, silence returned to the mountains. Soft, peaceful, complete. Abby turned to Cal, tears glistening in her eyes. I never wanted revenge, she whispered, just freedom. Cal brushed a hand along her cheek. You've got that now, he said, and more. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. More? He smiled faintly. A home that needs you, and a man who does too. For a few quiet weeks after the confrontation, peace returned to the cabin. The children resumed their lessons. Cal spent his days cutting firewood and fixing the roof before spring, and Abby found herself laughing again. It almost felt as if the storm had passed for good. But evil, when cornered, never dies quietly. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the ridges, the sound of hooves thundered through the valley. Cal's instincts flared instantly. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Down the trail came a single rider, one of Mrs. Whitmore's hired men, face hard as granite, eyes full of vengeance. Abby rushed to the doorway, her heart pounding. Who is that? Cal didn't answer. The man drew closer, shouting, You think you can ruin my employer's life and just sit up here playing house? She's in jail because of you. Cal's jaw tightened. She's in jail because of herself. Turn back now. The man sneered and raised his revolver. Then I'll finish what she started. Everything after happened in a blur, the crack of gunfire, the smell of smoke, the echo rolling down the valley. Cal's shot rang true. The stranger's weapon flew from his hand as he fell hard into the snow, clutching his arm. Cal strode forward, rifle steady, but not cruel. You'll ride back down that mountain and tell anyone else who comes that Abby Turner is under my protection and under the law's protection too. Do you understand? The man nodded, pale with pain, and scrambled back onto his horse. Within minutes, the sound of hooves faded into the cold dusk. Abby exhaled shakily, her legs weak. "You could have been killed," she whispered. Cal turned to her, his voice calm, but full of fire. "Ain't the first time I've faced a gun, but I'll tell you what's new having someone worth fighting for." She blinked back tears. "You mean that?" He stepped closer, his large, calloused hand cupping her face. "I mean every word. You didn't just teach my children, Abby. You taught me how to live again. I spent years just surviving out here until you came." The words broke something open inside her. "And you taught me what home feels like," she said softly. He smiled, just a little. "Then maybe it's time we stopped pretending this is temporary." Beneath the quiet sky, he pulled her close, kissing her like a man who had waited a lifetime for grace. The snow around them gleamed under the setting sun, and from inside the cabin came the sound of the children laughing bright, unbroken, free. That night, as the fire burned low, Cal whispered, "You'll stay, won't you?" Abby rested her head on his shoulder, her voice trembling with peace. "I already have." Spring came quietly to the mountains. Snow melted into silver streams, and wild flowers began to bloom around the Thornton cabin. Inside, the air smelled of fresh bread and pine. Abby's laughter mingled with the chirping of birds outside, and for the first time in years, her heart no longer carried the weight of shame or fear. The small table by the window had become her classroom. Emma practiced her letters, tongue pressed between her teeth. Benjamin worked on a story about a brave bear and a clever teacher. Samuel was reading aloud, his voice steady and proud. Cal sat nearby, pretending to mend a harness, but really just listening. When Abby looked up and caught his gaze, she smiled. "You're supposed to be working, Mr. Thornton." He grinned faintly. "I am. I'm watching my world come back to life." That evening, when the sun sank behind the hills, Cal lit the lamps and stirred the fire. The glow painted everything gold, the wood walls, the children's faces, the quiet contentment that filled every corner of the cabin. Abby set her book aside and joined him on the porch. "You ever think about what might have happened if that driver hadn't left me on the road?" she asked softly. Cal glanced toward the dark horizon. "Then maybe you'd be in some town that didn't deserve you, and I'd still be up here, just a man and his ghosts." Abby slipped her hand into his. "I guess the mountain gave me what the world tried to take away." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe here, Abby. Always will be." She leaned against him, eyes on the stars just beginning to appear, and for the first time in her life, she truly believed him. Stories like Abby's remind us that sometimes the world must break you before it leads you home. She was cast out for being different, abandoned for her kindness, yet in the silence of the mountains, she found a man who saw her worth and a family that needed her heart more than her perfection. If you're listening to this tonight, tell me, where in the world are you hearing their story from? And if you still believe that love can heal what cruelty destroys, then don't go anywhere. The next story is written for you.